Hello and welcome to Post-Pandemic Parenting brought to you by HCA Healthcare. I'm Dr. Frank Drummond, National Medical Director for Behavioral Health Services for HCA. I'm joined by three distinguished guests today to talk about the current state of parenting in the world. With me today, I have Fawn Colburn. Fawn is a licensed professional counselor, board-approved supervisor, and has been with HCA for over a decade. She currently runs a very popular women's intensive outpatient program in South Texas. Also today, we have Elise Padilla, a senior manager for field advancement with NAMI. She's an advocate for breaking down the barriers and stigma around mental health and substance use issues. Professionally, she aids in the creation of supportive mental health programs with the National Alliance for Mental Illness. And personally, she invests in the development of minority leadership in her community and strengthening behavioral health services in New Mexico as a peer in recovery. Also, we have Erin McClintock with EverFi as Vice President of Community Engagement, Impact, and Education. Erin McClintock leads EverFi's impact efforts around mental health, well-being, and social and emotional learning. She approaches her work from a strength-based standpoint and has a diverse array of expertise in mental health, substance use prevention, violence prevention, digital wellness and diversity, equity, and inclusion. Erin holds a graduate degree in mental health counseling and completed her postmaster's education in trauma and addiction counseling. All right, let's get started. Erin, could you share with us some of the effects the pandemic has had on children of all ages over the past year?
Absolutely, Frank. There is a lot that we're still learning, but generally we know that the past year has been challenging for most adults and kids alike. Some of our own data at EverFi has found that among middle and high school students, 38% report that they feel more concerned about their mental health, and more than half have reported feeling isolated. Kids have had major disruptions to their routines. They've had to become pretty dependent on technology, and in many cases, they've had their social interactions limited with some of the more important people in their lives, like grandparents and extended family members. Many have also experienced loss. That said, though, I think these kinds of experiences can also be incredibly helpful for boosting resilience. And part of it is how we're framing these challenges for the young people in our lives. So, yes, of course, it's important to validate that things can be hard, but also to use it as an opportunity for pointing out the strengths that you're seeing your child or your students or your loved ones display during this time. For instance, it must have been really hard to have to shift to digital learning this year and to not see your friends. I've noticed that you've done a great job adapting. You seem to be working really hard. I'm proud of you.
Great, and you've mentioned that you've noticed that that aspect of gratitude is sort of a marker in child and adolescents in particular about how they manage and how and their own resilience. Can you define gratitude for us?
Absolutely, yeah. So gratitude is essentially being able to take stock and appreciate the things that you have in your life or the small moments that you're able to surround yourself with. That's a really overgeneralized definition of it. But one of the things that we've actually also found in our research, as we looked at what students have been most impacted during the pandemic, is that in our mental wellness basics course, which goes out to about 500,000 K-12 students each year, there have been some direct connections between gratitude and mental health. So those students who took the course and endorsed the highest levels of feeling grateful for some aspect of their life in the online course were also those that expressed the lowest levels of concern for their mental health during the pandemic. So it's not to say, in just sharing all this, that all students have struggled. I've actually heard from many colleagues in the field that there are some students that have actually done really well during this time, and some would even say are thriving. I think it's going to be important to figure out who those students are and what things are making up their ability to thrive so that we can attempt to replicate that as we move back into life post-pandemic.
My children are 7 and 9 and had the similar worldwide experience of homeschooling, over-reliance on technology. And when they did transition around spring break back to in-person schooling, I noticed that the school did a good job of really relying on the gratitude, both from the teachers and the students, to make it a very open thing, how grateful we are to be back together and how this feels. And the kids brought it home. I mean, it was just, and it's really nice to see. Since we're talking post-pandemic, I think that's something you can actively cultivate in the school setting, in the home setting, to focus on. Very palpably happened with my children who did okay, but not great during this work school from home. Thank you.
Thank you. And if I can just add one more thing, sorry, because it
Yeah.
reminds me of something so I myself have a 2 and a 4-year-old. And I had this aha moment recently where I realized that they do not see things through the same lens that I see things. So they were home with me for about 9 months during the pandemic, and I found it to be quite the challenge. And recently I was talking to my 4-year-old, and he said, I want to stay home from daycare today. And I said, well, what do you want to do when you stay home? And he said, I just want to stay home with you while you work. Because for him, it was a really special thing to be able to do that if the pandemic had not happened, certainly wouldn't have taken place. So I also think it's important for us to recognize that our kids are going to experience things in a different way than we may perceive them as adults or think that they, quote unquote, should be experiencing.
I will say during this time, everyone has expressed to me that they're experiencing new emotions themselves, sometimes for the first time, dealing with real anxiety, depression. It's happening to the children also. What can parents do, Erin? I'll stay with you to help their children manage these emotions that sometimes feel new or foreign to them.
Sure. So I think first and foremost, it's important for parents to set the tone for conversations about mental health, not just when things are challenging or tricky, but every day, right? So during good times as well. Um, Second, I think it's important for parents to model mental health practices and coping skills themselves. So going back to my own kids, a 2 and a 4-year-old, as I said, they were home with me for 9 months during the pandemic. And there were often times when I would feel pretty frustrated. They would be making noise when I was on a call, and I had to constantly be mindful of my own parenting. And oftentimes, what that looked like was for me to take a breath, to let them know, mommy is feeling frustrated right now. I need to take a minute. And then to show them actively how I was working through my own feelings during that time. I think it's not to pretend that parents never get upset or never get frustrated, but when we do, using that as an opportunity to teach our kids what they can do in those moments to be able to help self-regulate, and the fact that parents do it too.
So increase talking about it, being open about it, and modeling. Would you say, what has been your experience, Elise, and what have you seen in your work?
Thank you so much. So I have 11 and 9-year-old daughters who have managed this pandemic in ways that I am in awe of. And something that I do is coming from someone with lived experience and having to have developed coping skills early on through mental health concerns and issues is we validate. And much like Erin just said, being able to talk about and set a tone for what's going on and creating a safe space where my daughters were able to step up and say, Mom, I'm really overwhelmed right now. I'm feeling anxious because I don't understand these assignments, or there's so much going on. And teaching them how to clearly articulate that is extremely important and beneficial, because then they have the words to bring those emotions to us, instead of a lot of times in younger children, we see them acting out because they can't articulate what it is that they're feeling. And so giving them the words and helping them identify. So we did a lot of work on today I feel, and we would fill in the blank. Today I'm concerned about, and we would fill in the blank. And so giving them the language and the tools so that we can then identify how they're feeling and tie that into coping and how we do. Validating, like I said, everything that they were going through. And Erin, you hit it exactly in the ways that I would have, is being able to model that behavior. So I would show them that, yes, I get anxious. Yes, as an adult, I get frustrated. These are the ways that I'm able to cope with it, and to show them how to work through those emotions, and that they're valid emotions at every time. Just because someone else isn't necessarily feeling that way, know that it's okay for you to feel that way. And how can you reach out so that you feel better? How can you find someone who can help walk you through that process, whether it be me or a grandmother who was here helping for the day? How can we be clear in saying how we're feeling and what it is that we need in that time?
Interesting. So name it, validate it, and then guide by your own modeling of behavior or by teaching. I think that's a great approach. Fawn, let's hear from you. What is your understanding of the impact that stress and trauma, which have been elevated in the past 12 months, what kind of effect does that have on children?
We know that it can leave kids feeling confused. As adults going through the pandemic, we've had our own moments of confusion and some really big feelings, really mixed feelings at times. So we want to be able to help them understand that they have these feelings, and yet they may not know what to do with it and how to work through it. And so, as Elise and Erin have talked about, is role modeling, validating, creating these safe spaces for our children to be able to work through their feelings in age-appropriate ways is incredibly important. I also want to bring to mind the idea that we can do this in some lighthearted ways. So as we've been going through the pandemic and we're now in a recovery place, as my kids are older than the other two ladies. My daughters started college during the pandemic, and my son's in his second year. And it was amazing to see their own big emotions of what it was like to go through a high school graduation and starting college at this time. And so that level of stress loss was something that was managed in our household by some silly ways, such as our old Wii got dusted off and dance parties were held. Virtual graduation ceremonies were shared. And so it became an opportunity to get creative and finding some different avenues to express those feelings, get that connection, and realize that we're all still in this together.
So here we are post-pandemic now. There's updated guidance on masking, which is exciting, but doesn't apply to all age groups, right? So we're still not 100% there. But at least can you tell us what you think are some good talking points as parents discuss the pandemic, the post-pandemic, and these guidelines with children to help them through it?
Absolutely. So from very early on, I know that in my household, we had news channels running at all times, kind of trying to figure out what was going and having these updates about things that were happening. And having younger children around, they could really feel what was going on in the environment. They could feel the tension and, being overwhelmed with everything that was happening. So what is really important to do is to help them understand in terms that apply to them as young adults, as children, as teenagers, so that while they're hearing these things in the media, it's not something that they're going to be able to really absorb themselves. So we talked about some of the basics, what was happening, that there was a virus going around in the pandemic. But what we really focused on was kind of the optimistic and the resilience pieces in this of saying, this is going on and it's going to change our lives for a little while. We don't know what that means, but we're all in this together. There are some things that we can do. And that helped us as parents allow them to gain a sense of control in this unknown time. So we talked to our kids in talking points is we wear a mask. The mask is to help, to prevent the virus from spreading. We wash our hands consistently. Everybody has their own hand sanitizer. And here are some changes that we're going to have to make in our day-to-day lives. And so just really clear cut and laying it out there for them so that they didn't have to filter through what was going on in the TV, what they were hearing from friends and family members. But more than anything, allowing them the space to ask questions. And we do that as often as we could in my household of saying, what does that mean to you? How are you feeling about that? Is there any confusion? How can I help you clear that up? And a lot of times we'd say, let's explore that together. Let's look and see what that means. Let's see what some of the symptoms are. Let's see how it's impacting people across the United States right now, and creating a dialogue to help them understand based on where they were coming from. So in recovery, it's something we learn is we have to meet people where they are, not where we expect them to be. And that comes with our children as well. We can't expect them to understand at our level. So opening up the communication for them to say, what are you understanding about this? And what can I do to help alleviate any fears or anxieties and to help you understand fully?
And any tips on getting kids to wear masks?
It's a game. And we did family mask sewing together. They didn't come out well, but they were very engaged. They had a part in the process. So they got to pick out fabrics. They got to buy. My daughter thinks it's the coolest thing to coordinate her mask with her clothes now, because in middle school, that's very important. And so it gave them, a fun fashion sense into it.
It's nice. That's good. That's a great idea. Erin, there's a lot of talk the whole time about self-care. We've got to be resilient. You got to take care of yourself so you can take care of your family, so you can take care of your job, etc. Can you help us define self-care, number one, and number two, things that you've seen that have been effective or have been elevated during the past 12 months?
Sure. And I appreciate the call out that it's something that gets thrown out a lot. And I think there's a real need to understand exactly what self-care is. And the way that I view it, and I think it's a little bit different for everyone, is really around what are you doing to keep yourself in a good space, whether mentally, physically? What are you doing to support yourself so that you can support the people that depend on you? I think that this is something that has become increasingly more difficult for parents, especially during this time, as many are juggling the role of being a parent, being an employee, sometimes both in the same house. So it can be something that can often get thrown around flippantly without really being thought about carefully. What I've found to be really effective for applying self-care in my own life has been prioritizing it in my calendar. So I know that in my workday, my calendar is something that's really important in order to protect my time and to hold myself accountable to things. And a tactic that I've deployed is to actually put in 30 minutes for a walk, or to take some deep breaths, or actually give myself those physical cues of this is exactly what I'm going to do in this moment. And then the hardest part, holding myself accountable to do it. So prioritizing it in the calendar is one way that parents can ensure that they're able to create moments for self-care. I think another one, going back to something we talked about earlier, is really thinking about ways that you can do it as a family. Can you enlist your kids to exercise with you or to engage in a meditation? There are tons of really great guided meditations that exist on YouTube or on various apps that are totally free. Or can you do yoga? Again, YouTube has some great yoga that's good for kids and for adults, or other restorative practices. And then finally, I think now the world is starting to open back up a little bit and people are getting more comfortable seeing one another, enlisting support from family and friends. Do you have family members or friends or even a sitter that you're comfortable with who can come and watch the kids for a short period of time so that you can go out and do something for yourself, whether it is just driving around in your car to get some time away from your family, or doing something that really involves a massage or taking care of yourself in some other way. I think is also something that is worth considering if you have the means to do it.
Here, working with frontline workers and trying to be understanding and try to create some, what do you really need and how can we help you be better in self-reliance? The answer is always not that nuanced. It's time off. I need time off. I've been working so hard at this hospital or so hard at this thing. I just need some time. And I think it's true for parents and children too. You need a break, and it doesn't need to be complicated. It can actually, like you said, be something super simple, but that you do it and you make time for it and you make it deliberate. Fawn, you had some ideas about sort of mindful self-care. Do you want to share those with us?
Sure, Dr. Drummond. So I call it my 2D goals because we have some do's and we have some don'ts. So first, we don't want to add more pressure to the family system. Our families have been through a lot, and probably like you, Dr. Drummond, I have been at the hospital. I was never quarantined. I was one of the people driving around with that essential worker letter in my glove box during lockdown. And so we don't want to add more pressure as we're now coming through into recovery time. But we do want to integrate some of those simple self-care strategies in our day-to-day life. So as Erin said, yes, definitely self-care appointment, having that commitment to ourselves. The same way we would uphold a dental or an eye exam appointment, keeping that appointment with ourselves is important. Working with women in an IOP setting, I find that what's been really helpful is being able to weave these self-care skills into our day-to-day. So some concrete practices that have been successful are things like when we're done using the bathroom, and especially for families that have little bitties that were engaged in potty training and bathing, and all of these are really kind of messy times, is taking that extra 10 seconds to just be mindful of that smell of the baby shampoo, the temperature of that water, being able to use our senses to ground us in the here and now, in these mindful moments. Another thing is, since so many of us have been home, is being able to look around and appreciate the simple things we have. So one thing that comes to mind that Erin and Elise, and maybe you can relate to too, Dr. Drummond, is the dishwasher. So we know that things like doing the laundry, doing the dishes, these are tasks that are reflective of our family's age and stage. So when I had littles like Erin does, my dishwasher was full of colorful IKEA bowls and cups. And now it's filled with Texas A&M mugs. I have Texas A&M logos everywhere. So being able to, again, find these quiet moments in the midst of our busyness and remind ourselves that we're okay, we're safe in this moment, and we're doing the best we can.
And I would note you got your kids to do the dishes, which never happens at my house. What a win.
Dr. Drummond, I have a saying of, I'm not raising children, I'm raising future adults.
I like it. You're better than me. I'll just say it now. Elise, I'd like to go on now to talk about some of the other ways that you think, or that we've seen that the effects of the pandemic will shape kids' emotional development, or what we're kind of seeing. I mean, I know there's delays in education, right? For sure. So there's some big and small catch up happening right now in education, reading, some of these critical points. What about emotionally? What are we seeing?
Well, from an optimistic perspective, I would say we're really fostering resilience in children right now. We're teaching them how to cope with something that can turn our lives upside down at the drop of a hat. and showing them that strategically we can look forward and say that this too shall pass. But in the meantime, it's about focusing on ourselves, reevaluating our expectations, because knowing things can change, we have to be able to change with it. And so, having small kids, being someone who was working through the pandemic, I have expectations. I laugh that I typically set the bar even too high for myself, but realizing that in this time, we all had to reevaluate those expectations, children included, teachers, all of that. And so helping them to understand that it's okay to shift and to know that we do our best every day, but every day can be a different level of our best. And so teaching them that, through coping, through resilience, by reaching out and talking, that we can manage our emotions as they come, but it's not something that we can always predict. And so being ready to say that this is change, but change can be good and change can be beneficial, and keeping an optimistic perspective will really help us in the long run of managing these hurdles, these ups and downs, coming back into a new normal. Because for me, the pandemic wasn't the most fearful part. As someone who deals with generalized anxiety disorder, I knew that my worries were going to come at this time, at the end of the pandemic, when we were going to have to reacclimate into our communities. I knew that as an introvert, that this was something that was really going to reactivate traumas within me. And so being able to prepare and say that this too shall pass. So in that time of passing, how do I step back into a new normal? And how do I make sure that I'm prepared, that I have a support system that I can reach out to, and just being able to keep an eye out on the landscape, kind of on the horizon, to say, okay, this is a process we're going to get through together. And by knowing who I am and validating my emotions and the emotions of those close to me, it's something that I will work through and we can get through it.
So are you allowing yourself to have a bad day?
Absolutely. Yes. I took a mental health day yesterday, which doesn't constitute a bad day, but it's saying that, you know what? My kids were at school, my husband was at work, I had a free day. And whatever it decided to be. And typically my expectations would say, oh, you can get so much done. You can get laundry done. You can catch up on some of your other stuff that you do. But I realized that I needed that time to decompress. And to be truthful, my laundry is still in the dryer right now from yesterday because that wasn't my priority. I knew that I needed time to decompress and to just reacclimate to where I am in my situation. And it's so beneficial. It's really helped.
I know I've personally had some days where I'm at work or working and I just don't have the productivity or the energy. And I had to be mindful about that and give myself that it's okay. I mean, it's okay. It's a stressful time. A lot of people's work has gone to, like 5 to 10, not 8 to 5, because working from home and the reliance on electronics, etc. I think as parents, everyone should give themselves a little bit of a break because that parenting has also gone up to 24/7 for a certain amount of time. There's good and bad, like you're saying, Elise, I agree with you. But also we need to give our kids a break too. They're going to get sick of us. They're not going to feel like doing the dishes some days, and might not even be in the best mood. So all these things it's a little different than in sort of usual times. I think it's important to take a step back and reflect on that and make your own space and give your kids some space as well. Erin, what do you have to say about that?
I couldn't agree more with what Elise had to say. I think that the biggest gift we can give ourselves in this moment, whether it's for us or for our kids, is permission. Permission to just be however we're showing up in that moment. And I also think someone said to me at the beginning of the pandemic, and it really stuck, we can't compare our current version of ourselves with our pre-pandemic version of ourselves, because if we do, we are not setting ourselves up for success. Thinking about the expectations that we put on ourselves, and are those expectations realistic? Are those expectations through a lens that is realistic to this moment, or are we putting an expectation on ourselves that we would have applied before the world really turned upside down? I love to acknowledge the fact that while, yes, in the traditional sense, some students may be perceived as falling behind emotionally, I think to Elisa's point, our capacity for growth, our capacity for resilience, our capacity for strength, and for truly understanding what we're capable of and getting through difficult times has never been stronger. And so I hope as we move into the future, whatever that's going to look like, that those are some of the things that we take with us as well.
So it's time to develop an appreciation for how emotionally we have grown as people, as families, as kids, and acknowledge that and embrace it, right?
Absolutely. And then I think too, just the fact that we are so much more open as a society to talking about mental health, the fact that we are having a webinar on this topic, the fact that webinars have increased significantly. I think probably all of us can relate to, being asked to talk a lot more about mental health. It's moved really into the mainstream, and I hope that, that doesn't fade away in the post-pandemic world, that we're really able to continue prioritizing how important mental health is, not just when things are tough, but at all times.
I was just reading 2,000 medical students have signed up this year to be psychiatrists, and that's up from a kind of a long history of about 500 a year. So that's another indicator that people are ready to talk about and work with and want to engage on mental health. I find that very encouraging as well. Elise, I'm going to go back to you. Over time, to compensate for the lack or change as far as peer interactions, that isolation that Erin was speaking of before, what are some things families can do to kind of compensate for that?
Well, I think it's really important for us to understand, coming from a different generation, of ways that our kids connect nowadays, where we had video games, but that isolated us because we were in the house playing video games alone. Now, things like video games are a social protective factor. They're finding ways to be able to engage with peers, with people outside of their immediate family and systems like that. So recognizing that even though it may not always make sense to us, this is a new generation and they have different ways of engaging socially. So just keeping that in mind, but also being creative. One of the things that we did is I had birthdays during the pandemic, right? And when you're 8 turning 9 and 10 turning 11, those are big deals. And so a lot of people normalized drive-bys where you would do a drive-through birthday party with balloons and things, but we did virtual sleepovers. So everybody had their iPad with FaceTime, and we would all get a movie together and watch it, and we would take snacks and drop them off at the door of friends' houses, and my girls would be allowed to just stay up until the iPad died. And so everyone would have their iPad with them. And so it was a virtual sleepover where they got the sense that they could giggle with each other, they could talk and do games, and they all did their nails from home together. So it created that solidarity and that sense of community and friendship while still adhering to the social distancing and the need to be away. So it's about being creative in the things that we can do with our children.
Yeah, I've never felt older or more out of touch than when my daughter was trying to explain Among Us to me and how important that is to her. She loves it. To your point, though, it was a social engagement for her, and it's a game that became very popular this year among the middle school sets or the elementary middle school sets. So, yeah, I do think there has been some interesting growth there, and I think we should take what we've learned and like I said, some of these creative sleepovers or play dates, the way you pick your friends, that kind of thing. We could talk about it with our kids and our families and say, what do you know now, and how does that influence your decisions from now on? So thank you. Erin, there's also a lot of talk about self-care and mindfulness, and mindful parenting, I think, is very interesting. Would you help us kind of define what mindfulness is and what mindful parenting might look like?
Sure. So mindfulness generally is a practice. It's a practice of being present, being attuned to your surroundings and your way of being in any given moment. And mindful parenting essentially is taking the practices of mindfulness and bringing them into the ways in which you approach parenting, creating that moment of pause before you react. It is taking a moment to acknowledge how you are feeling before choosing to act on those feelings. I think that mindful parenting is gaining a lot of popularity as of late because in this moment where so many of us have been presented with stressors like nothing we've ever experienced, there's a real awareness to the fact that we need to figure out how to sit with those feelings, but then also how to not let those feelings dictate the ways we react, possibly in negative ways. The way that I tend to approach mindful parenting in my own life is to sort of take a beat, right? So I referenced earlier the importance of taking deep breaths when I'm feeling frustrated or stressed out, rather than yelling or stomping or doing whatever it is that I don't want to do to show my kids. And so for me, it's acknowledging how I'm feeling, giving permission to feel that way, right? Like, it's okay that I'm feeling frustrated right now. It's okay that I'm feeling stressed, but then choosing to move it into a direction of not acting on that in a way that is yelling or getting frustrated. Another example of mindful parenting is when we're listening to our kids, right? So sometimes our tendency of our child comes to us is to immediately decide what we're going to do to respond to whatever they're saying, rather than listening to hear them. And this requires a good amount of work, but instead of listening to respond, so if my 4-year-old comes to me because his brother has stolen his toy, my first instinct might be to want to fix it and react. And what I've tried to do instead is to listen to hear what he's saying, and then in the moment craft my response based on whatever it is that he has said, rather than what I immediately as a parent feel like I should be doing. I've noticed even in those interactions that my child seems to feel or seems to show that he's being validated. And I think that that's really powerful.
It's a year of parenting, right, to the point of exhaustion. And so to me, when you introduce the idea of mindful parenting, a lot of good parenting going on, a lot of bonding going on, a lot of times it wouldn't have happened because of increased time together. Mindful parenting for me is trying to take time to be on the child's level, to take just the one. So I'll take the youngest child just to take a ride and go get a Happy Meal at McDonald's, because I know she'll get very chatty when we do that, and it makes her happy. And it's our special time together because mommy hates McDonald's, right? So that has been a real important thing for us to do on some sort of like every other week kind of basis. And then, my other daughter likes to do other things. To me, that's mindful parenting in the sense that it's making it and creating a moment that feels separate and feels different, and it doesn't matter what it is, but something that feels special and it feels like a connection on a different level, and maybe being a little bit more self-revealing during that time of yourself as well, to talk about your feelings with your kids. All that is, to me, mindful parenting, and looking for those moments and embracing them and even talking about it. That was really great when we went to McDonald's yesterday. And I have a picture here on my wall where my daughter at school drew a picture of me and her with a Happy Meal. And it's like, I love you, Dad. You're the best. I like when you take me to McDonald's. So, it clearly was working. So it's meaningful. We're going to have to kind of wrap up here, but I'd like for all of you to be able to sort of weigh in on your opinions. We can start with you, Fawn, because you work with lots of ladies every day. What are signs that a parent maybe needs a break, or maybe needs a little extra help, or some elevated level of intervention that you see? Or what is that point that people should really maybe escalate their needs for help?
Sure. So one of the things that ties into mindfulness is being aware about our internal dialogue. So if we think about it, we all have that internal critic, that internal coach, and as we're moving through this pandemic and again into a recovery state, there's been times where maybe our critic was louder than our coach, or vice versa. And so if that negative dialogue is bringing us down, what are some of those practices that we can do to sort of snooze our critic and say, okay, I get that you want me to be okay, you want my family to be safe, and we're okay. So what does my coach have to say about this? That we are okay, that we are switching from surviving to thriving. We are able to engage in some self-care and even self-compassion skills. And so a simple tool that we can use to evaluate that internal dialogue is to take that step back and say, the way I'm thinking right now, would I say this to a friend? If a friend was facing the same sort of challenging moment I'm facing, what might I say to them? And to offer that same kindness and compassion to ourselves. And if we're really struggling with that, then again, that's where sometimes getting that professional support to be able to have that external voice come alongside us and say, we are all together in this, and to find some additional coping strategies from professionals to help reframe some of those negative thoughts into more positive. The second piece is our bodies. As we've gone through this, we know that we've carried a lot of tension or maybe some concerns. And so developing that awareness of, am I more of a shoulder stress, back stress, kind of how does my body actually process through some of what I'm thinking and feeling? So a simple acronym that I use in session is PATH. So P is for pressure, R is for air, T is for tension, and H is for that heat. So giving ourselves that assessment of how is my body doing in this moment, and what is the next compassionate thing I can do to help my body, my heart, my mind continue moving forward.
Thank you, Erin. What are some of your thoughts on knowing when an adolescent or child or a parent really needs to get some elevated help?
Sure. So I think we talked a lot about coping skills, right? And I love that Fawn highlighted some really positive ones to deploy. I think an indicator that we are not doing so well is when we start to look to unhealthy coping skills. So, when a parent maybe is drinking more than they typically would as a mechanism of coping, or when they're feeling more anger or more frustration that they just can't seem to control, when their ability to keep cool is more difficult. I think that those are typically signs that a parent needs a break or maybe even would benefit from talking to a professional about what's going on. I remember when I first became a parent, I heard that African proverb, it takes a village to raise a child. And before I had kids, I was kind of like, what does that even mean? Now I fully understand what that means, and I think that it's really important for everyone to think about villages for them, whether it's close friends, whether it's family members, whether it's a support network of colleagues, whether it is professionals that we talk to, but really recognizing, what are the things that I can do to make sure that I'm not alone in this, and leaning on those people to the degree that you're able to and feel comfortable is also really important. And then I know we've all heard the expression of putting our life masks on first, right? When you're on a plane, you put your life mask on before you put it on your child. And I think the same applies to our well-being, putting our own life mask on first, making sure we're taking care of ourselves so that we can do the things that we need to do to take care of our kids and the other people who depend on us.
Yeah, it does. It does take a village. One thing that we learned, a lot of people learned really quickly, is they're terrible teachers, and then terrible fill in the blank after that. So it's been an interesting time, and I think it only elevates the fact that you're right. It does take a village to raise a child, and being appreciative of that and open to it can make a big difference. Elise, what are some signs that you have seen or feel when someone probably needs to get the external help?
Both Aaron and Fawn have touched on this amazingly, and I think it is about self-awareness, of understanding our baseline when we're getting to be overwhelmed, when we're overcompensating in different ways. And as I mentioned before, for me, it was really reevaluating expectations and saying this is a new world, and I cannot hold myself to the same expectation that I did before. But also just remembering that if we're responding in ways that aren't healthy, we need to recognize that. And I love, Aaron, how you brought up it takes a village, because that's something that I held very close to me, is it takes a village to raise a child. But what do you do when you don't have that village in the same sense that you did before? And so how can you recreate that? And how can you find different ways, whether it's a quarantine where you had a team of people that came and just kind of hunkered down with you so that we could spread the wealth of being able to participate with our children. And so just knowing where we are, where we need to be, and understanding that it's okay to not be okay. I know it's a term that's really been coined through this pandemic, but being able to evaluate that and say, you know what, I need some time. I need to step away. And then for me, it was really helpful to remember that although my employer is great, I highly doubt that they'll remember how I responded to the pandemic in 5 years. But I can guarantee you my children will remember how I handled the pandemic with them and the relationships that we built in that time. And so really investing where I felt that it mattered most during this time, of creating a safe space for myself and my children, making sure that my work and my professional life did stay on par, but knowing that in the long run, the people that were going to be impacted most by my mental wellness were my family and my children, and always keeping that in mind, that you can't pour from an empty cup. And just knowing that it's really important to be able to step back and say, this is time that I need so that I can be better for my team, for my village.
That was really well put, Elise. Thank you. And thank you for all the work that you've done, all of your comments today. Thanks for the good conversation, everyone. I've learned quite a bit. I hope you all have too. Just want to wrap it up by saying that we are in, thankfully, post-pandemic parenting at this point, but there's a lot of lessons that we've learned, and I think everyone should be really proud of the work they have done with their families, with themselves over this time, and take that positive and take that strength and move forward. Once again, thank you, everyone, and have a great day.